Please don't kick me. I'm already hurt, the waitress cried. And then, the Undercover CEO did something that changed her entire life. What if a single moment of cruelty became the spark for the most beautiful change someone ever experienced? Julia leaned against the cold brick wall behind Tony's diner. Her uniform still damp from the coffee a customer had deliberately spilled on her. At 34, she was used to carrying invisible bruises, the kind that come from working 3 jobs, just to keep an 8-year-old child fed and safe. Her hands shook. Not from the burn, but from the customer's final, cutting words. Maybe if you weren't so clumsy, you wouldn't be stuck serving people like me. Julia didn't know that inside the diner, a man at the corner booth had witnessed everything. A man in faded jeans and a simple shirt. Someone she assumed was just another working-class regular. But David Chen, worth more than most small countries, felt something tighten in his chest. A feeling he hadn't felt in years. He'd been watching Julia for 3 weeks. Not as a CEO, but as a man trying to understand the heart of a place he was thinking of buying. He dressed simply. He drove an old pickup. He always said please and thank you. And he left quiet, generous tips. Julia had mistaken him for a mechanic or contractor. She had no idea that this gentle man sitting quietly with a cup of black coffee was the CEO of Chun Industries, a company famous for turning diners into community centers full of life. But spreadsheets never told him what he truly needed to know. People did. How they treated each other when they thought no one important was watching. He had been watching a customer named Frank for weeks, a man who seemed to enjoy humiliating the staff, especially Julia. Spilled drinks, sharp insults, exact change, never a tip, a smirk every time she bent down to clean up his mess. But tonight was different. When Julia came back inside, shaky but pretending to be fine, Frank snapped his fingers. Hurry up. And don't spill it this time. The diner went silent. Julia walked toward him with the coffee pot, shoulders tense. And that's when David stood. Slow, calm, but with a presence that made every person in the diner lift their head. He walked straight to Frank's table. I've been watching you, David said quietly. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. It was the kind of voice that carried straight into a person's spine. For weeks, I've watched you treat this woman with complete disrespect. Frank scoffed. Mind your own business. If she can't handle the job. But David gently placed his hand over Julia's coffee cup. No, he said softly. Julia, you don't need to serve someone who treats you like you're less than human. Frank stood up angry. Who do you think you are? You're just some nobody. David didn't flinch. Maybe, but I know the difference between a man and a bully. Then he placed a $100 bill on the table. Your meals are covered for the next month. But from now on, you treat every worker here with respect. Or you eat somewhere else. Silence. For the first time, Julia's tears weren't from humiliation. They were from someone finally standing beside her. Frank stormed out. And David turned to Julia, guilt in his eyes. I owe you an apology, he said, for watching this man hurt you for weeks and not stepping in sooner. He invited her to sit with him. And as she cautiously slid into the booth, he told her the truth. I'm in the restaurant business. I was considering buying Tony's diner. Julia's heart dropped. Another business taken over, more jobs lost. But David continued quickly. What I learned here wasn't from any report. I learned it from watching you. He listed everything he'd noticed. How Julia remembered every customer's little preferences. How she checked on the elderly couple. How she covered other employees' shifts. How she worked through exhaustion and never complained. Julia asked quietly, how do you know I'm struggling? Because I grew up watching my mother work 3 jobs too, he answered. I recognized the look in your eyes. Then he slid his business card across the table. Julia froze. David Chun, CEO, Chun Industries. Her jaw dropped. "I believe the best businesses are built by people who treat others with dignity," he said. "And you've shown me exactly what that looks like." Then, the offer that changed everything. "I want to buy this diner. And I want you to help me run it. Not just as an employee, but as a partner." Julia was overwhelmed. "I don't know anything about running a restaurant." "You know everything that matters," David said gently. "Heart, kindness, leadership. People trust you." He paused. "In 6 months, I believe you could be the general manager of the finest community restaurant in 3 states. 6 months later, Julia stood inside the beautifully renovated diner, now called Julia's Table, as her son placed fresh flowers on each table. The walls were filled with local art. The lights were warm and welcoming. Employees finally earned living wages. With health care, there was a scholarship fund for workers' children. A wall of kindness where customers paid meals forward. Julia had become exactly what David saw in her, a leader with a heart that lit up the whole room. The community flourished. 3 more towns wanted their own Julia's Table. And every week, David still sat at the counter with a cup of coffee, smiling proudly as he and Julia planned the next chapter. As she watched her son greet customers, Julia whispered, "Everything really can change in a moment." David handed her a coffee. "And you create those moments every day. Thank you for joining us on Julia's journey. Remember, sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply see each other."